Hello, good day. Now we are into our next chapter in module 3, and that is since we already discussed about listening, we're going to discuss about speaking. Now, I'm very sorry this is taking a while to be posted because I have really a lot of things on my plate right now, and my stomach's been acting up lately, and I can't focus. I really do apologize, but we'll try to finish everything today as fast as I can. So now we're going to discuss about teaching receptive and productive skill, and our listening, by the way, is a receptive skill kasi input papasok yung information sa mga learners kasi ang listening. Tapos, ngayon naman, mag-discuss tayo ng productive skill, which is speaking kasi ang kailangan nito is output, di ba? Okay? So, as an introduction, speaking is in a second language involves the development of a particular type of communication skill. Of course, and oral language, because of its circumstance of production, tends to differ from written language in its typical grammatical, lexical, and discourse patterns. Now, both speaking and writing are productive skills, and they involve the use of language. But even though they are the same in that they have similarities, they have a lot of similarities, but they also have differences in these aspects. Like iba kasi yung grammar ng speaking, ng discourse or speaking sa writing, di ba? We'll discuss more about that later. Okay, so that's the introduction for speaking. Now, background tayo. Now, speaking in an L2 or a second language has occupied a peculiar position throughout much of the history of language and teaching. And only in the last 2 decades has it begun to emerge as a branch of teaching, learning, and testing in its own right, rarely focusing on the production of spoken discourse. Kasi before, di ba, as I've told you, in order to identify the proficiency of a learner when it comes to speaking a language, what they usually use to assess a learner is through writing lang. Kasi there are three reasons as to why medyo natagalan yung pag-consider sa speaking as a testing, like an assessment for English proficiency or for language proficiency in its own right. So we have three reasons. The first is tradition, next technology, and then third is exploitation. So what is tradition? Yeah. So the first is tradition. Grammar translation approaches to language teaching still have a huge influence in language teaching, marginalizing the teaching of communication skills. Now, if you have read our module 4, the the strategies in teaching English, we have their grammar translation. Kasi ang grammar translation kasi very technical. Like, for example, nagtuturo ka ng grammar, uh, subject-verb agreement. Ang mangyayari lang yan is, hindi mo nagagamit yung speaking as an assessment if you can speak the language. Ang ginagawa mo lang kasi dyan is mag-memorize, di ba? Like, i-memorize mo na yung subject-verb agreement and then gamitin mo yan siya when you're speaking. But that has proven to be quite somehow an unreliable way to assess students when it comes to their speaking skills. The second is technology. Remember, wala pa tayong way of like wala pa tayong technological advancements in the past. So medyo mahirap gawin talaga ang uh, to assess your speaking abilities. So it was only in mid 1970s na nagkaroon na tayo ng tape recorders na naging mura and practical to enable the widespread of study talk. Right? At that time in 1970s, they started to use tape recordings para ma-record yung mga like sample ng dialogue na ipapakinig nila sa mga estudyante or i-record yung estudyante mismo na magsasalita na. So that's only in the 1970s. And the last one is exploitation. Now, most approaches to language teaching, other than grammar translation, we have direct method and audiolingual approach, as well as more marginal approaches such as silent way, community language learning, and Suggestopedia, exploited oral communication centrally as part of their methodology, not as a discourse skill in its own right. Ano ba ibig sabihin itong last part na ito? Ito na part. Yan. Ang ibig sabihin yan is before, ginagamit lang ang speaking as parte ng lesson pero hindi siya gagamitin pang assessment. Hindi siya gagamitin sa evaluation or sa assessment to assess if the child is proficient when it comes to speaking the language. Used lang siya as a strategy, ang speaking. It's not used as a discourse skill in its own right. So that yun yung naging problema. Most of the focus in teaching oral skills was limited only to pronunciation. Before, kasi nga di ba sabi ko, when you assess a child in for proficiency in speaking a language, they mostly use written assessments. And pag nagkakaroon ng oral assessments, pronunciation lang yung concern, which is wrong kasi aanhin naman yung kagalingan mo sa pag-pronounce or pag-announce ng words or letters if you cannot communicate properly using the context or the situation that you're going to speak into. So, yun yung naging problema ngayon. But thankfully, after like how many years of research, it was then there was speaking was shown in a different light, and that it should be a discourse skill. It should be used in assessment in its own right, and not only a way or a strategy to teach. Yeah. So, this confusion of speaking as a skill in its own right with speaking as a central medium of learning continues in current developments. Recently, however, speaking has increasingly emerged as a special area in language pedagogy. So, remove na natin yung idea na speaking is only used as a methodology or as a technique or strategy in teaching, but it can also be a way to assess learners. Okay? So, as you can see, there are a lot of words here that you're familiar with. If you have read Module 4, Grammar Translation, Direct Method, meron tayong audiolingualism, meron din, I don't know if I included this, but I'll just explain, I explained it on the last module as well. Okay? So, within existing approaches to the teaching of language, one of the first to offer a clear perspective on the teaching of oral skills was audiolingualism. So, di ba nag-start tayo sa pag-consider sa speaking as only as a medium of instruction or only a methodology, not an assessment in its own right. Pero nagkaroon gradually ng changes. Pero dito na changes, it's still not enough kasi sa paggamit ng audiolingualism, behavioral approach kasi ito siya. Meaning nagbase sa behavior. Later, makita at ma-recognize natin yung advancement. Let's focus muna here. So sa audiolingualism. Now, audiolingualism appreciated the importance of input before output. Kasi if you have read in Module 4, ang concern ng audiolingualism is that a teacher lets a student listen to recordings of a native speaker in English ba, sa klase ninyo, sa English. Ang ginagawa niyo is pumunta kayo ng AVR, pinaparinig mo sa mga estudyante mo yung conversation ng Native Americans. Tapos, doon nila i-observe yung grammar rules or yung pronunciation sa mga napapakinggan nila. And then they try to imitate that through drills. Ganyan. So, with this oral skill proceeding written, the 4 cycles of listening, speaking, reading, writing was applied in sequence for each structure. Also, audiolingualism was based on behavior, what I've mentioned. It was based on behaviorist theories of learning and assumed that language was little more than overt, observable behavior. Kasi nga, di ba pag gagawin mo yung audiolingualism, nakikinig, na-observe lang yung bata. Sa pag-observe niya, doon yung nakikita yung rules of grammar, inside dun sa conversation, yung pronunciation, yung enunciation, and they try to imitate that. So, it's behavioral in that aspect. And then, audiolingualism believed that repetition was central to learning since this has been shown to help memorization, automaticity, and formation of associations between different elements of language and between language and contexts of use. So, more on repeated actions tayo dito, like pabalik up, ikaw pabalik-balik ka magpaparinig ng mga audio, or it can be the same audio or it can be different audios with like the same speaker or the same context pa rin, ganon. So that's in audiolingualism, that's how students are presumed to learn, to acquire the second language. In our case, it's English. Okay? Pero in the 1970s, language teaching became increasingly influenced by cognitive and social-linguistic theories of language and learning. Ayan. Sa audiolingualism kasi, pag nagpaparinig ka ng mga like tape recordings or audio sa mga estudyante mo, medyo limited yung context nila. Kasi yun lang yung napapakinggan nila. Doon lang din limitado yung kanilang learning when it comes to the second language they want to acquire. So now, in the 1970s, through more research, instead of believing in a behavioral aspect, they try to look on the cognitive and social linguistic aspects na. And this specialist realized that audiolingual approach omitted to take account of two aspects of language and communication. First, it neglected the relationship between language and meaning. Diba? As I've repeatedly mentioned in the first chapter, it's not enough that you are knowledgeable of the rules of grammar with English, kasi nga English yung second language at English is English. It's not enough that you know the rules of grammar, like kabisado mo yung subject-verb agreement, kabisado mo yung preposition, lahat ng verbs, adverbs, conjunctions, interjections. It's not enough that you're knowledgeable on that aspects. You have to know when, where, and how to use the language. Okay? And second, audiolingualism failed to provide a social context with which the formal features of language could be associated with functional aspects such as politeness. Kasi there are instances na in the particular language that you are in, halimbawa tayo L1, gumagamit tayo ng po and opo, di ba? Remember that does not exist in our L2, which is English. So how do we try to communicate with these people without being rude or without being misunderstood? So yun yung kulang sa audiolingualism. Kasi sa audiolingualism, just like grammar translation method, medyo focus lang siya sa parang limited na access ng language. Unlike kapag when we look at it in a cognitive and social linguistic aspect, we not only get to look at the language but also at the culture of the language. Very important na interrelated talaga yung culture and language. Okay? So, ngayon, a communicative approach developed in two ways. First, a notional functional approach attempted to extend the teaching of grammar to include the teaching of interactional notions or paying attention to factors of formality and functions like semantics. Does this word have the same meaning to my context and to the context of the other speaker, such as making requests, apologies, invitations, and introductions? Second, a learner centered approach emerged which emphasized the importance of learning or of starting from the meanings learners wanted to communicate and working out how to express them. So that's basically the background of speaking. So speaking has been tied up only as a method of instruction because of three reasons: tradition, technology, and exploitation. And then most of the focus in teaching oral skills was limited to pronunciation. And then later on, instead of focusing only on that part, they tried to look at it in a behavioral perspective. So meron tayong audiolingualism. But then in the 1970s, they tried to look at it in a cognitive and social linguistic theories, which is there should be an interrelation between language and culture or the context in which you're going to speak their second language. Okay? Now, sa research tayo, remember, to understand what is involved in developing oral second language skills, it is useful to consider the nature and conditions of speech. Most current approaches draw to a psycholinguistic skills or information processing model. Now, Levelt proposed that speech production involves four major processes: conceptualization, formulation, articulation, and self-monitoring. Ito daw yung nangyayari na processes, when we try to speak in our second language: conceptualization, formulation, articulation, and self-monitoring. So ano ba itong processes na ito? What happens inside the processes? Remember, tayo ay Pinoy. Tapos, kailangan natin magsalita sa English. Ano bang nangyayari na process in our minds? In our minds, we start with our minds until na ma-speak natin yung mga words na gusto natin sabihin. So it starts with conceptualization, second formulation, articulation, and so what's conceptualization? Conceptualization is concerned with planning the message content. So conceptualization basically is the planning. It occurs inside your head. Like ano ba yung mga gusto mong sabihin, um, ano ba yung mga dapat mong sabihin, ano ba yung purpose kung bakit ka nagsasalita. So, dyan nangyayari sa conceptualization. Okay? It draws on background knowledge about the topic, about the speech situation, and on knowledge of patterns of discourse. Okay? So the conceptualizer includes a monitor which checks everything that occurs in an interaction to ensure that the communication goes to plan. This enables the speaker to self-correct for expression, grammar, and pronunciation. So while you are planning, pag naplano mo na yung sasabihin mo, at least you can also do some assessments or correct yourself inside habang hindi mo pa nasasabi yung mga words. After conceptualization, meron tayong formulation. Now, the formulator finds the words and phrases to express the meaning, sequencing them and putting in appropriate grammatical markers, such as inflections, auxiliaries, and articles. So, ang conceptualization, gusto mong sabihin na, okay, nasa utak mo, nagpaplano ka, di ba, nagugutom ako, gusto kong kumain ng hamburger. Tapos, yun yung nangyari sa conceptualization. So, sa formulation naman, ang nangyayari niyan is, yung from L1 mo, ita-transfer mo siya into L2 sa utak mo. Gusto kong kumain ng hamburger. Gusto kong kumain ng hamburger. So, paano mo yun sasabihin? In English, ayan. Diyan yung nangyari sa formulation. Now, sa articulation naman, saan yung articulation? Ayan. This involves the motor control of the articulatory organs. In English, the lips, tongue, teeth, alveolar palate, volume, glottis, mouth cavity, and breath. In short terms, in articulation, doon ka na nagsasalita. Okay? Dito nagpaplano ka, dito nagpo-formulate ka at the same time, transfer from L1 to L2, and dito nagsasalita ka na. And then, self-monitoring is concerned with language users being able to identify and self-correct mistakes. Okay? So, remember, I am speaking in English right now, and I am a Filipino. My L1 is Filipino, and then I'm speaking with using my L2, which is English. So you see, this process happens very fast in our minds. But if you lack knowledge pa when it comes to speaking your L2, then these processes can take a long time. Okay? All this happens very fast, and to be successful, it depends on automation, to some degree in conceptualization, to a considerable extent in formulation, and almost entirely in articulation. So, automation is necessary since humans do not have enough attention capacity to consciously control the three types of process. Hence, if you are a beginner when it comes to speaking the language, it will be difficult for you to pay attention to all these processes simultaneously under pressure of time, diba? As you can see, if for a person who's really good at speaking the L2 or the English language, then these three processes, conceptualization, formulation, and automation, can happen very fast. So speaking is constant. But if you are a beginner and if you have a little knowledge about your L2, or in this case English, then conceptualization, pwedeng magtagal ka, okay ka sa conceptualization, nakaplano ka kung ano yung sasabihin mo. Pwedeng magtagal ka sa formulation, or pwede ka rin mas magtagal sa articulation. Okay? So, yan yung process of speech. Tandaan niyo yan. Okay? Ano pa bang mga importante dito? Wala na. Okay? Oral interaction varies widely in terms of whether participants have equal speaking rights or whether one of the speakers adopt or is accorded special rights. Now, this is also another factor that can hinder the process, yung process of speech. Kasi maybe your status with the one that you're speaking with is different from yours. So, kagaya nito, example, you're a patient and you're talking to a doctor, you're a pupil talking to your teacher, you're a student talking to your professor, you're an examinee talking to your examiner, you are a child talking to your mother or father. So, and so on and so forth. Kasi there are things contextually that you have to take note of, kasi hindi pwede na same lang yung grammar, lexical, and discourse patterns mo when you're speaking with your classmate and with speaking to your teacher, kasi that's a different thing to remember. Okay? If you can remember in your oral communication, di ba, we have different types of speech style. It can be intimate, it can be casual, it can be formal, frozen, ganun. In this case, kapag doctor, patient, teacher, pupil, professor, student, formal language yung gagamitin mo. So, meaning there's a different type of patterns, language patterns that you have to take note of, okay? So, also, um, speaking is physically situated face-to-face interaction. So usually when we speak talaga, it's face-to-face. Usually speakers can see each other, so they can refer to the physical context and use a number of physical signals to indicate. This is in contrast with writing. Kasi sa writing talaga, you cannot, I mean, it's not necessary that you have to be face-to-face, di ba? And also the difference is, kaya kailangan talaga may separate na separate na syllabus yung speaking, may separate syllabus yung writing, because there are a lot of varieties of way that they differ. One of which is this: speaking kasi can tolerate physical context. Like you can see me speaking, so you can see my gestures. And speech can tolerate more implicit reference. When we say can tolerate more implicit reference, like even when you look at my gestures can help to for you to understand what I'm talking about. Unlike in writing, because in writing you only read words, like pure words. Unlike in speaking, my gestures, my facial expression, at the same time my words can make you understand what I'm talking about. Okay. Now finally, speech situation in most speech situations, speech is produced online. Ano bang ibig sabihin nito? Speakers have to decide on their message and communicate it without taking time to check it over and correct it. So any interlocutors cannot be expected to wait for long for the opportunity to speak themselves. Hence, time pressure means that the process of conceptualization, formulation, articulation may not be well planned or implemented and may need pauses and corrections. This is exactly why when you are going to become English teachers in the future, tapos ang mga estudyante ninyo ay beginner, 'di ba? Kailangan may diagnosis kasi dapat kayong gawin para malaman niyo kung beginner ba sila, intermediate or advanced learners when it comes to speaking the language. Pag nakita ninyo na beginner ang mga estudyante ninyo, wag niyong papagalitan kung medyo matagal siyang makapagsalita ng English, medyo nahihirapan siyang mag-English, like parang it takes time. Kasi remember, in most speech situations, speech is produced online, meaning unlike me, who can conceptualize, formulate, and articulate in a very fast manner because I'm already an advanced learner, it can be different for them. Kasi nga, di ba when you're speaking, sometimes it's um, not planned ahead of time. It's, ano ba tawag na? Extemporaneous, ano yung isa? Um, kumbaga pa parang abrupt, di ba? You're not given enough time. There is a time pressure. So, don't be mad when your students cannot speak fluently in a short span of time because it's different for them. It's different for every types of learners. Okay? So, ano pa ba? Wala na yung types of speech acts. Ito, the inevitable adjustments that occur in speech are overt and public. So, what does it mean? It includes changing of message or its formulation before it is expressed, whether or not interactively negotiated, or self correction after the message has been expressed, and various kinds of hesitation introduced to slow down output and create planning time. So, these are the adjustments that you have to do. So, kaya sometimes speaking or conversations can parang hindi siya linear, parang zigzag siya. Kasi there are inevitable adjustments that communicators or learners will experience, especially if they are beginners. Okay, so that's it. Now, oral language differs from written language both in process and products. They both include yeah the spoken language can resemble written language and written language can simulate spoken patterns, but the implication for teaching is that oral skills and oral language should be practiced and assessed under different conditions from written skills. They are the same, but they can also be entirely different. That's why they need to be separated. They have separate syllabus, they have separate assessment styles, and all that because they're different. They, I mean, they are both productive skills, but they are different in some aspects. And unlike various traditional approaches to providing oral practice, a distinct methodology and syllabus might be needed. Okay? Now, how do we develop our second language speech? Yeah. Now, this can be difficult kasi either we focus on fluency or accuracy. Yet, getting learners to focus on accuracy is likely to encourage a less exploratory or fluent use of the language. Pushing them to develop fluency, on the other hand, might encourage greater use of formulaic chunks of knowledge, discouraging attention to accuracy and reducing speakers' capacity for processing complex language. Ano ba ibig sabihin nito? I'll give you a better example. When you try to train a child to speak, halimbawa, mga Filipino students, when you try to speak them in different situations, first situation is that binigyan mo siya ng libro. Di ba technical lahat ng mga matutunan mo doon sa libro. Yung isa, pinapanood mo ng mga English movies. Now, itong nasa libro, itong nagtuturo, natututo ng English gamit ang libro, accurate siya. There is an accuracy in learning the language. Pero there's less on fluency. Kasi technical yung natutunan niya, pero hindi niya alam kung saan ba pwedeng gamitin yan in different situations or different contexts. Pero ito namang natuto na gamit yung mga movies, wala siyang accuracy kasi diba, like for example, manood ka ng movies, pwede silang gumamit ng mga slangs or even like I ain't doing nothing and all that. So, there's a fluency kasi nadidiscover ni estudyante, ni student 2 na ni student B na language can be used in different contexts. It can be formal, it can be informal, pero there's no accuracy is not developed. Kasi nga the student B is exposed into different contexts, into different aspects na hindi niya ma-identify na saan ko ba dapat pwedeng gamitin lang itong rule of verb na ito at saan ko ba pwedeng gamitin lang itong rule of grammar na ito, di ba? So that's the difference. So kung nag-focus ka lang sa accuracy, kulang sa fluency. Pero pushing them to develop fluency, on the other hand, might encourage greater use of formulaic chunks of language, discouraging attention to accuracy and reducing speakers' capacity for processing complex knowledge. Okay? Yan yung difference. So now, in my case, I am more of like student B. I learned about the language while watching a lot of English movies. And then as time goes by, when I try to imitate that, I learned like, nakakita ka ng movie na, bakit ganito ang sinabi niya? Bakit gumamit siya ng sabi niya, this is an apple. Di ba, ganito lang yung mga Black Americans. Like, this is an apple. Tapos dun sa isang movie na napanood ko, sabi niya, this is an apple. Ano man talaga ang gagawin, ano man talaga ang susundin ko. So, ayun, may fluency ka pero wala kang accuracy. So, ang ginawa ko, after like watching a lot of movies, I went into books. I started learning the language because I really got interested in it. So that's why there's an improvement on the part. That's one way. I'm only one student. I'm only one learner, so I don't represent the totality of the learners. So it can be effective that way na you improve first the fluency and then focus on the accuracy, or you can start with accuracy and then followed by fluency. So that's how we develop our L2 speech. Now, upon this practice, it's very important to take note that task recycling seems to provide the basis for learners to integrate their fluency, accuracy, and complexity of formulation around what becomes a familiar conceptual base. Ano ba yung task recycling? I think I've seen some of you use this na may mga lesson plan na pinasa na may mga drills. Okay? So drills are examples of task recycling kasi um, for a week, pabalik-balik yung task na ginagawa mo. Like, for example, ito, nagpapabasa ka ng greetings. Like, how do you do? I'm fine, thank you. I'm fine, thank you. Like, what do you want to eat? I want to eat, next day, ganito naman, ganyan, ganyan. So, at somehow, it improves the three of them, fluency, accuracy, and complexity. So, task recycling is considered like one of the best tech strategies when we want to teach in speaking the language to our learners. So, dito tayo sa practice kung saan yung source ng ideas niyo for lesson planning. So, in terms of language teaching methodology, the communicative approach proposes that tasks should provide opportunity for learners to use language in order to communicate meanings without focusing on accuracy. Okay? Sa communicative approach, hindi ka muna magbabase na, mali ang grammar mo na nabanggit kanina, mali ang sinabi mo, you have committed an incorrect, you have committed grammatical errors and all that stuff. Hindi ka dyan ang focus mo. Kasi ang focus mo dito sa communicative approach is fluency. You let them speak the language first before you try to give feedbacks on them. Okay? I'll delve deeper to that later. That's communicative approach. Ano ba example ng communicative approach? Role plays. Kasi 'di ba, sa role plays, you are letting the learners speak the language, and yung main focus mo is hindi yung grammar nila while they are doing the role play, but the content of how much they've learned or how much they can do it. Okay? That's another example. Another example of communicative approach is interview. Like, parang role play pa rin, pero ang gagawin mo is, kunyari, ipa-pair mo sila into two, tapos, kunyari, may interview na magaganap sa harap, ayan. See, they're speaking the language, and the main point is not the grammar, but the content. Okay? Not the fluency. Not the accuracy, but the fluency. Excuse me. Now, there are major implications of the work reviewed in the early part of this chapter, which are the following. First, a range of different types of interaction need practicing. Drills should be done uh, always. It should be done always. The conditions of oral tasks need to differ from those for written skills. Babalik-balik ko yan. Magkaiba dapat ang methodologies na gagamitin sa written and then sa speaking skills. Okay? Improvised speech needs practice but around some content familiarity. Ito, very important to remember dito. Yung mga improvised, ibig sabihin ng improvised speech, ba, pag nagpapa-roleplay ka, kailangan siya ng practice. Pero hindi to memorize, kundi familiarize lang. Para at least alam na nila yung output. Kasi mas maganda na hindi mo ipa-memorize sa kanila. Kaya nga pag nagpapa-roleplay kayo, hindi pa din, yun yung activity ninyo. Hindi pa din kinabukasan pa i-perform. Kasi ang tendency niyan is memorize nila. Di walang learning sa language. Ang gawin niyo is 10 minutes lang siguro, like 10 minutes lang na preparation and then pa-roleplay mo. Para hindi nila memorize yung dialogues nila, but familiar lang sila kung ano yung gusto nilang sabihin. And that way, napapractice nila yung pagsasalita ng English, di ba? Yeah, very good yan. Overt oral editing skills need to be encouraged, including the use of communication strategies. Yes, very important to remember as well. Oral language processing requires integration of, yes, accuracy, complexity, and fluency. And for learners, oral abilities to develop courses need to vary the emphasis on fluency, accuracy, and complexity. There are activities that can integrate these three, pero it's also better if separate new activities for fluency, separate yung activities for accuracy and then for complexity. Yan. So I think same pa rin ito ng discussion. Same pa rin yung discussion. Ito, cycles of activities. Di ba sabi ko sa inyo, i-explain ko ito na, ito na part. Ayan, okay. So, meron tayong tinatawag na cycle of activities when it comes to speaking. It involves an input phase, it involves a rehearsal phase, and then a performance phase. Ito yung tatandaan nyo when you are teaching English. Input phase, rehearsal phase, and performance phase. Kasi this is a very good example of scaffolding. Alam niyo ba yung scaffolding? Saan lesson ba yan, Prof. Ed? Principles of Teaching 1, I think, or basta, scaffolding. So, ang scaffolding, paano ba i-explain ang scaffolding? Ang scaffolding is a strategy in teaching na the teachers are considered facilitators. Think of like when you're teaching a child how to ride a bicycle. Siyempre, ang gagawin mo una is, ipapakita mo sa kanya paano siya mag-bike. Papakita mo sa kanya, and then, pagkatapos niyan, siya na yung sasakay, pero hindi ka rin sasakay para sabay na mag-bike sa kanya. Ang gagawin mo is, hawakan mo lang siya, bike, hanggang sa unti-unti, bibitawan mo siya para siya na makapag-bike. That is scaffolding. Kasi you're not there to spoon-feed the information, but to just guide them onto how to reach the information. Okay? That is input phase, rehearsal phase, and performance phase. We have an example here. Yan. Example, learners first hear a recording of native speakers undertaking a similar task to one they are to do, providing them with a rough model. Then they perform this task in small groups. During when students express themselves without worrying about errors, then the teacher observes and provides feedback. And then finally, students perform the task before the class with a focus on an all-around performance. So saan dyan ang input phase? Of course, ito na part. Recording of native, you have to listen to when the students listen to a recording of native speakers undertaking a similar task to the one that they are about to do. So it's input phase. Kumbaga ito yung part na ikaw yung nagbabike, pinapakita mo sa kanya. Rehearsal phase naman is they have to imitate what they have heard in the recording, pero this time they should not worry about the errors. Okay? That's the rehearsal phase. And then after ng rehearsal phase, magbibigay si teacher ng feedback. So ano ba yung mga strengths or weaknesses ng performance nila, ano yung mga mali nilang nagawa, ano yung mga tama nilang nagawa. And then after ng feedbacking, ito na yung performance phase kasi gagawin na nila dapat na all-around performance na graded na. Okay? That is scaffolding. Okay? And repetition is central to this cycle. Meaning this process, phases should be done oftenly. Okay? Yeah, I think that's it. Here, we just have to remember these ideas. Fluency activities should provide learners with the freedom to improvise their own expression. But, however, that's according to Brumfit, di ba? Na they are given the freedom to speak however they want to speak the L2, but according to Loschke and Blave Roman, tasks can target language features in terms of whether targeted features are likely, useful, or necessary to complete a task. So, dito, sa first, ano ito, idea ni Brumfit is that student-centered siya na the students are given the idea or the freedom to on how they want to speak the language or how they want to utilize the language. But according to Loschke and Blave Roman, teachers are also given the chance to pick the tasks that can I mean, that can target language features. Kasi nasa sa kay teacher yan kung asan dito sa mga activities na to yung useful and necessary to complete the task or to acquire the lesson, to learn the lesson. Okay? Ayan. So, ano ba yung summary natin sa speaking? You have three. First, oral language syllabus deserves a fuller study and it should be separated from written syllabus because they're entirely, I mean, they both are receptive skills, but they are entirely different from each other. Second, explore further how fluency, accuracy, and complexity can be integrated, in particular through the use of different combinations and sequences of activity types. Okay, so either you combine them in one activity or you can do several activities concerning these three. So I've explained the differences of these two naman, di ba? And last, encourage learners to move from fluent and accurate performance to include more complex language. Do not only focus on accuracy and do not only focus on fluency. Focus and do not only focus on complexity, but focus on the three at the same time. Okay? So I think that ends our lesson for chapter 2. I will be back for chapter 3. Goodbye.